to be submitted in two phases. The first, information is needed to be submitted to US Customs at least 24 hours before the vessel is laden in the foreign port. The second, transmission needs to be provided to US Customs at least 24 hours before the vessel reaches the US port. So when do you file ISF 10 versus ISF 5? ISF 10 is filed in two situations. The first one is when you plan to do an entry into the US. The second is when you plan to do an immediate delivery into the US. ISF 5 is filed in three situations, but we'll talk about two right now. Number one, immediate transportation. And number two, transportation and exportation. If you saw my introduction video, you know that we spoke about entry, immediate delivery, immediate transportation, transportation, and exportation. All of these four things is something we're going to talk about later on. All of these four things actually happen, or they're options, once a shipment reaches the US. So we're going to be discussing all these four things in detail when we talk about entry and domestic transportation. So what are the 10 and the 5 elements that are part of ISF 10 and ISF 5? Let's go through each one. The first one is importer of record number. The second one is consignee number. The third one is the seller name and address. The fourth one is buyer name and address. The fifth one is ship to party. And of course, if the buyer and the ship to party is the same, then you write the same thing in both boxes. The manufacturer's name and address. Number 7, the country of origin. Number 8, the HTS or tariff code, which has to be up to 6 digits. The full HTS code is up to 10 digits, but in this case you only go for having the stuff at their place. Afterwards, it's the buyer who is responsible for everything. So in this case, the seller is going to have the stuff at their facility, and then the buyer, they're going to pick it up, and they're going to be responsible for all this freight that's going from number 1 to number 2 all the way to the final destination. The second important Incoterm that you need to be aware of is called FOB. FOB is usually used for vessel transportation, but in real life, since no one really understands Incoterms, people use FOB for a bunch of different things, including truck transportation, land transportation, air transportation. You'll see Incoterms in weird places where they're not supposed to be. But for the exam, what you need to know is that FOB pretty much means that the buyer and the seller, they agree to a point anywhere throughout the shipment where one's responsibility falls and the other's responsibility picks up. So for example, let's take the same example as the one above. Let's say this is London, point 1, this is a UK port, this is the US port, this is somewhere Pennsylvania, and then this is Michigan. So in this case, the buyer and the seller agree to a point where each party's responsibility changes. It could be, for example, FOB London, FOB UK port, FOB US port, FOB Pennsylvania, FOB Michigan. So what does it mean? What does FOB London, FOB UK, FOB US ports, and so on, what does that actually mean? So let's go through each one. For London, that means that the buyer, they're pretty much responsible for picking up the items in London. So what does FOB London mean? What FOB London means is that the buyer, they're responsible to pick up these items in London and take it all the way to Michigan. What does FOB UK port mean? What this means is the seller is responsible to take it from London to the UK port, and then from there on, it's the buyer that's responsible. What about FOB US port? This means that the seller is responsible. This means that the seller is responsible from all the way to London to the US port and everything that comes in between. And then once the shipment reaches the US port, it's the buyer who is responsible to take it from the US port to Michigan. What about FOB Pennsylvania? As you might have guessed, this means that the seller is responsible up to Pennsylvania, and from there on, the buyer is responsible to take it to Michigan. What does this mean? What does FOB Michigan mean? It means that the seller is responsible to take it from London all the way to Michigan. The last one that you need to be aware of is CIF. What does it actually mean? CIF, what does CIF mean? CIF means that the buyer, they are responsible for insurance and freight, import duties and taxes, and the seller, they are responsible for everything else. So if you see CIF, let's say you see there's a shipment coming from UK again to US, and it says, the invoice states that the value of the shipment is 10,000 CIF. This means that this 10,000, it includes, this means that the $10,000 include international freight and insurance inside the value. As we go down the list, you'll see why that's very important. So now let's talk about Incoterms 2010. In Incoterms 2010, we're going to be talking about two new Incoterms. It's going to have the three ones that we already discussed and two new ones. There are a couple others, but those don't really show up on the exam. So the two we're going to be talking about, as you start taking the exam from older exam to the newer exams, you'll start to see these two terms somewhere here and there. So that's why you need to know what these two extra terms actually mean. So starting from the first one, X works is the same one as before. FOB is still going to stay the same. The third one is CIF, same as above. The fourth one, this is actually two Incoterms that pretty much mean the same thing. DAT or DAP. In this case, the buyer is only responsible for importation duties and taxes, and everything before that is the seller's responsibility. So the seller is responsible from origin all the way to US port, and then from US port, and then from there the buyer is responsible for import duties and taxes. Number fifth one is DDP. DDP pretty much means that the seller is responsible for everything. They are responsible to take the shipment from